Welcome to episode 11, Safari Special Part 2. We're out here in Kenya's Maasai Mara at the Matikoko Safari Camp.
Yeah, so here we are, out in the midday sun in equatorial Africa, doing basically what everybody's advised not to do and drinking a beer in the extremely warm heat. Yeah, so cheers on that.
More than warm. I'm going to collapse
sure we
in a minute.
Planned this better, but never mind.
Yeah. Cheers.
Why don't we get a campfire going as well, just to throw a bit more heat into it?
Yeah, why not?
You know?
In episode 9, we talked about autofocus settings for wildlife photography, and Brad Cherson has been in touch. Thank you, Brad. He's asking about the autofocus options which are available on his Fujifilm let me get this right because I'm not a Fujifilm shooter, XF 150-600 lens. Alan, that sounds like it's completely in your department, so I'll hand over.
Yeah, and as if by magic, let's actually take a look at the lens in question. Here it is here. Beneath the red badge designation on the lens, which is just where my thumb is, we'll show you a better picture on the YouTube and on the website. We have the red badge designation where the focus range stroke limiter selector is for full and 5 meters to infinity. We've also got this aperture lock switch, which is pretty much standard stuff for the Fujifilm lenses. But then we've got these autofocus options that Brad asks about. And towards the front of the lens here, all going around the sort of barrel of the lens, we've got these other extra buttons too. These buttons at the front can be customised to either activate autofocus as you would by the sort of traditional half squeeze on the shutter button, or to lock focus, or another option is you can actually use them to recall a stored focus distance preset.
Yeah, actually, I've programmed mine entirely differently to focus, and it's just used for spot focus. That's just my preference. So it means that if you're photographing birds in flight, it just gets the exposure on just the spot, and that's just something I've been playing about with, so it doesn't have to be focus related. Yeah,
so I don't actually use them to focus and recompose or anything like that, but the sort of the two options that I do sometimes use, one is a memory recall, and what you do is you focus on an area perhaps where there's a little bit of wildlife action, and you commit that to memory using the little set button here, and then when you're focusing on some other action around and about, you can then reselect that, sort of recall that memory setting by pressing one of these buttons here, and it'll go back to where the sort of focus memory recall is. It's really, really useful in a sort of wildlife hide environment where you might have different species visiting different areas, different branches, or you might have different bits of action with wildlife at the same time, and you want to very, very quickly go between the two. So by pressing this and recalling that focus area, it sort of saves you a very, very precious fraction of a second, because by the time you recompose, your camera should already be focused basically on that area. The other option is just to use it as a standard autofocus on. What I often recommend to people is who perhaps don't really hold a telephoto lens as well as they could. Sometimes people hold it too close to the camera rather than bringing this sort of left forward down to the front, and you get a lot of camera shake like that. So sometimes I recommend, if they have this on the lens, to actually use these front buttons for autofocus, because it forces the left hand forward and encourages like good ergonomic telephoto lens hand holding for heavier, longer lenses.
It's more stable, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, so that's basically what those presets do. We've got AF lock, we've got AF on, and we've got preset, and it's just a little three-way switch. So hopefully that answers your question, Brad. Cheers.
Where do I start? I'm standing out in the Maasai Mara here. I've looked forward to this trip for so long. I've never been on safari before. So many people have told me how wonderful it is, and I have to say it's exceeded expectations hugely. I'm delighted I came along with Khalil and Alan, who have provided a wonderful week for us. We're in a beautiful camp. We've seen the most amazing animals. If anybody's thinking about doing this, please jump at the chance. It's absolutely wonderful.
As you probably know by now, Alan and I like a drink. And if you don't know that, where have you been? We always have beers during the podcast when we're recording it. So, yeah.
Yeah, not to disappoint, here's a drink that I think it's fair to say has become the official cocktail of the African Photography Safari. I was going to say safari twice. It's Kenya's Whiskey Dawa.
Yeah. So Tina's going to make this for us on the video.
And then I think we'll just have to drink it for her because she's made it. It would be rude not to drink it, even despite the fact that it's only about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. But, you know.
Yeah. And we haven't even been out on the safari drive for the afternoon yet. Anyway, services to safari and all that.
Absolutely.
Cheers.
Karibu Matikoko. Now it's time for whiskey dawa. I'm going to start how I make it, how lovely it goes. So first of all, I take ice cubes. I will mash the lemons. So I put like 3 cubes or 4. Then I take 2 small teaspoons to sugar. So I put 2, 1 and 2. Then I put honey to taste. You can put either a small teaspoon or full big spoon. So I'll put like 2. So it's time for mashing. I'll use my mashing stick so we can create the juice for the syrup. Make sure you mash it very well to create that syrup from the lemons. And you mix your syrup very well. I think now I'm ready to make my whiskey dawa. So I use that spoon to mix it very well. The syrup, I pour it on the glass that has ice cubes. And a cube from the syrup, I put like 2. Because it still have some syrup carrying inside it. This is my whiskey. I'm using single top, so I have to pour a little bit. And then you mix it with tonic water. Use the spoon to just do a little mixing. You can garnish using either rosemary or mint leaves as you like, or any lemon tops, the garnishing thing. And then I'll garnish my whiskey dawa with rosemary. You're ready to drink. Yeah. This one.
Well done.
That's my whiskey dawa. Karibu. Enjoy your drink.
We will. Thank you.
So I've got the hard job, as usual, to test the lovely whiskey dawa that's been very lovingly prepared for us by the wonderful Tina here at Matikoko Safari Camp. So cheers, thank you very much. Oh wow, that is epic. That's very, very nice. Thank you. Well done.
So you probably noticed if you're watching on YouTube that we are not still in Kenya, although we kind of are if you're watching this linearly. But anyway, you kind of get the point. I did say don't pay too much attention to continuity because firstly, we're shite at it. And secondly, we forgot to talk about drones, which is what we're going to do now.
So a lot of our guests come on safaris and a few of them ask beforehand, is it worth bringing a drone? And usually our response is just don't bother. Yeah. Importing a drone legitimately, and that word legitimately is important, requires the approval of the Kenyan Civil Aviation Authority. You need to get a permit, and basically dealing with any civil service department in Kenya is just an endless administrative vortex that'll just leave you wishing you hadn't actually bothered starting in the first place.
Yeah, actually, I did a bit of a deep dive on this a while ago, trying to take my drone into Kenya, and I went through all the right channels, did all the research, contacted what I thought was the right people. They just didn't even respond.
No, exactly. I think as well, you know, when you leave Jomo Kenyatta International Airport, you generally get your bag x-rayed, and in doing so, they see some lenses, they see some cameras, and often what they do is they start checking your bag to see if you've got a drone in there as well. Anecdotally, we've heard of people who have lost their drones at this point, and I think I've sure I've witnessed somebody having a drone confiscated, and good luck in getting that back. It ain't going to happen. So it's just not worth the hassle. It's not worth the risk. It's not worth the bother.
They've certainly checked our bags and said, "Is that a drone?" And luckily, it wasn't. But they've thought, is that a drone? And we probably would have never got it back if it was.
Yeah.
The Kenya Civil Aviation Authority and the military themselves take a very hard line on it. So you're not allowed to take drones into Kenya, and you're not allowed to film. I think there's partly a security risk, but also you're not allowed to film in the wildlife areas. So, for example, you wouldn't be allowed to film in the conservancies or the National Reserve, for example. I don't actually know what the consequences would be, but you would probably risk losing your drone and possibly being prosecuted as well.
I think at the very least you'd probably get a formal ban from the reserves and the conservancies.
Yeah.
At the very, very least, yeah.
Yeah. So for anybody who's interested, and I realise that if you're not interested in either drones or video, you'll probably already be asleep by now. Yeah, exactly. This is my current drone. This is a Mavic 3 Cine, which is a very high quality drone, probably the best quality you can get before really going up in physical size, where you would want to put it, and price, yes, exactly. Although this was very expensive anyway. This shoots ProRes HQ, and again, those at the back are probably nodding off, but it shoots 5.1K at 50 frames a second, or 4K 120, which is crazy. It's a very impressive piece of kit.
You could just fly it through for the I wouldn't even be better than that. Just holding it. Have it just fucking hovering here.
It's also a fantastic drone to work with. It's really easy to handle. DJI have done a fantastic job to that. It's very impressive.
So apart from Khalil's love affair with his new drone, drones actually are used very effectively and legitimately. It's that legitimate word again is quite important for conservation activities in places like the Mara. And we're going to be talking to Niels Mogensen of the Mara Predator Conservation Project about them in this episode of the podcast. But what we've kind of found that sort of introduced this article is that Khalil found an interesting item on how they're actually being used in the Mara by the Mara Elephant Project.
Yeah, it popped up several times in my inbox from the Mara Elephant Project. And what was interesting is that traditionally they use helicopters, and we've seen them use helicopters quite a lot in the past. That you can, we'll say, oh, what's going on here, and the guides will say that's the Mara Elephant Project. And what they're doing is they are not only protecting the elephants, but they're also avoiding human-wildlife conflicts. So, for example, elephants might be going into areas where there are crops. So, existingly, if that's a word, the helicopters will be trying to herd the elephants away from village areas where they could come into conflict with people. And that's bad for both sides, for obvious reasons. Now, drones are incredibly cheap compared to that. So what happened was I started seeing these emails where they were fundraising for drones, and they were looking for several tens of drones, so that they could actually use these drones instead of the helicopters, which is obviously vastly cheaper than using a helicopter. And it means that all the ranger teams on the ground can use drones day and night, because these drones, actually the one I've just shown you, it's essentially the same drone as I've got, but they've got thermal sensors on instead, which means that they can operate them at night as well. So at any time of day, they can be following the elephants, seeing where they are, tracking them for their own safety, but also from people's safety, which is essential for the survival of the elephants, because otherwise they become persecuted because they're encroaching on village areas. And obviously, if you're a villager with crops, that's the last thing you want to see is a whole herd of elephants coming in to eat everything.
Absolutely. I mean, it must represent an absolute huge saving in costs of fuel. Some solar-powered drones ahead of a helicopter and fuel.
Yeah,
it must be a mass. I mean, I think it's it's pretty epic, really. With money that can be diverted to more sort of appropriate conservation purposes.
Definitely. Just to be clear, that the drones themselves aren't solar powered, but you would charge them.
No, charge the batteries,
with,
obviously.
Solar
the
power.
Drones, that would be a bit of a nightmare. That wouldn't.
I know. The sun's not shining.
So an example of the sort of type of thing a drone can help with is where we perhaps have a female elephant with a calf, perhaps a bit of human-wildlife conflict's gone on, and the calf's or the elephant or the mother's been wounded with an arrow. Unfortunately it is something that happens. Now, as we know, when approached with care, elephants can be very, very peaceful. However, a female with a calf sort of ups the potential for a bit of distress, and with that distress comes a little bit of anger as well. So, approaching a wounded elephant with a calf, that actually comes together and represents an even more significant risk. And the drone can actually fly in, it can take some pictures, it can get some video, and that can relay them can be relayed to the vet and the ranger team, perhaps help to sort of shepherd the elephant out into a place where it can be more safely darted, not just for the safety of the ranger team and the vet, but also for the safety of the elephant and the calf as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think another thing that is worth saying is that just because you have a drone and it's tempting to use it, it's not always the right thing to use it. Obviously, we've talked about the fact that it's difficult to even contemplate using a drone in Kenya. But in general, I think there's a bit of a perception that, well, I've got my new drone, I can just fly it wherever I like. And, you know, I've had a drone license from the CAA in the UK for years now. You know, I've sat exams, I've, got loads of documentation. I understand the safety aspects of it from, from an animal point of view, from a people point of view, buildings, vehicles, all the rest of it. I know what the rules are. But I think there's a big temptation for people to just fly wherever they like once they've got their new fancy drone. And I don't think people, even though I think rules have been tightened up, I don't think people are generally aware of how little you can actually do, particularly in the UK. But then if you go to Kenya, it's just like zero. We had one incident, Alan was telling me actually, where a guy had, in this country, in the UK, had taken his drone. I don't know who this was, but he'd taken his drone. We'll not mention any names. He'd taken
it's
his.
Nobody we know.
No, well, no,
Nobody
exactly.
directly, no.
He'd taken his drone to RSPB Bempton, where the gannets nest. So you've got, I don't know how many thousands of gannets there. Yeah.
Thousands,
so it's a protected species. It's private land, and basically this guy's flown his drone over the gannets on the basis that, well, the RSPB do it, so why shouldn't I? And this is just wrong on so many counts. I mean, for a start, it's RSPB land, so it's illegal for him to take off from their land without their permission. That's kind of the least of it. But just, gannets are protected species. They're on the UK Red List. I think they're an amber listed bird. You can't just go and fly a drone around them. That's right. It's a triple SI, which is I can't remember what the acronym is.
Scientific interest.
That's the chap. Yeah. It's also an SAP, and I cannot remember what that means. But no,
it's important.
Yeah. So I know these things that, when you're thinking about doing a drone operation, you look on a map and you look on various websites and you find out what's actually possible to do. And, especially with wildlife, there's usually restrictions. It's doing something like what he's done is wrong on so many levels and is probably illegal. And, it just gives people like me, who have spent a long time training and upholding all of the safety things and keeping my license current, and spent a lot of time and a lot of money as well on getting and keeping my license every year.
And for insurance purposes.
Insurance as well, all the rest of it. Yeah. It's kind of annoying that it gives the legitimate users of drones who understand the risks to the public and to wildlife and all the rest of it a bad name. So it's a shame, I think. Also, I think you mentioned this about apart from all that, he goes there and then somebody else who's there sees him doing that.
So where this kind of stems from is that the RSPB we're using a drone to do their annual census of of gannets nesting on the cliffs. At one time they would have done it from boat with a pair of binoculars or a spotting scope, but then they decided they would do it using a drone instead, which is great because, one drone doing legitimate conservation work flown by a qualified pilot with a couple of spotters monitoring what's going on, looking for disturbance, looking for stress in the birds. That's one thing, and that's fine. But once you get another person coming and using a drone, then another, then somebody sees they've used it, and then everybody else comes in and I want to use a drone, and then it happens all throughout the day with various people. Then it becomes a real sort of disturbance issue. And can you imagine that sort of thing happening in Kenya? Imagine how many drones would be, if it was allowed, be flying over the Mara River and the crossings, and how much disturbance and problems that would actually cause to the Great Migration. I mean, it takes very little to disturb a herd of wildebeest that are going to cross the river. Yeah. It takes very, very little to do that. So all these drones flying around, it would be it's just unthinkable, I think.
It would just be crazy, yeah. And you can completely understand why they restrict them. And it's not just the wildlife thing, it's also the military thing. I think they're worried about terrorism and surveillance and all the rest of it. So you just can't fly stuff in Kenya without special permits, so just don't bother.
Hello everyone, I had a really fun time here in the Maasai Mara and I learned so much. So it's actually my second time going on a safari trip, and despite that, this trip has definitely exceeded expectations. With the help of Khalil and Alan and their planning, I learned a lot about the culture here, especially with the different tribes and the indigenous people, and it really helped me gain a global knowledge. Despite not actually doing any photography, I still had so much fun because, again, going back to, the culture and other things, I learned so much. And it was nice because throughout the trip, we had a lot of people with different backgrounds and different nationalities, and it helped me gain a wider sense of knowledge and other perspectives throughout the world. Not only that, I had a lot of fun experiencing African wildlife here. There's a lot of things that I haven't experienced before, like seeing jackal hunting or the hyenas eating hippos, and that was really lovely. It was great because I felt so grounded, especially now in the world where everything is so fast-paced and new innovations is being, presented at every corner. It was nice because I got to be more in touch with wildlife, and it was a great trip. I definitely recommend that you guys come join. Even if you're not into photography, it's still really lovely. Yeah!
As a complete side issue, have you ever heard a chicken impression?
In the Maasai Mara?
In the Maasai Mara. Because we had a guest with us, Michael, who did the best chicken impression in the world. And I heard this chicken and I thought it was actually something being played back on an audible device. I was in another vehicle, but you were in the vehicle with Michael when he did this chicken impression. And I didn't realise for about 4 or 5 days, until about 4 or 5 days later, that it was Michael making the noise and it wasn't some sort of audible device or ringtone or text message thing on his phone.
I decided that for posterity we should record Michael from Switzerland doing
it was
his
very good.
amazing
Yeah, it's fair
impression.
Enough. Yeah,
so here we go.
Brilliant. Thank you, Michael.
You provided a lot of amusement. We're absolutely delighted to have another good friend here, Niels Mogensen, Senior Programme Scientist at the Mara Predator Conservation Programme. You might remember Niels from a podcast episode where we talked about playing the sound of a distressed young buffalo to attract any lions in the area. And we just ended up with a lot of confused hyenas and very irate buffalo. Well, that's Niels. He was trying to bring out the local lion population in Enon-Kishu Conservancy. Just to rewind a bit, Alan and I first met Niels back in 2012 when we joined him with the Mara Naboy Show Lion Project to photograph the collaring of a lioness. That was a fantastic moment and, total serendipity. We weren't expecting anything and we came across Niels and his team collaring a lioness called Nashipai, and it was the lion was being darted by a Kenya Wildlife Service vet so that Niels could collar her and track her movements. technology can undoubtedly be a great aid to conservation. We've been chatting about the Mara Elephant Project's use of drones earlier in the podcast, and somebody who's worked in the front line of conservation for many years. What are your thoughts on the use of drones here in the Maasai Mara for conservation research?
Well, I think drones can be really helpful to do research.
Yeah.
They just have to be regulated, and obviously in the Mara you have a lot of air traffic, so we have to be careful. But if you have a few drones that are tasked to do specific things, I think they can be very, very useful.
Right.
Be it for the Mara Elephant Project, help to mitigate conflicts or to chase elephants away. For us, we could use drones to count wildlife instead of driving and doing these manual transects. You can have drones to do it.
And that's easier.
Yeah, that's easier, and you can fit them with thermal cameras to find elusive leopards, for example. I just know it's just a bit difficult to get the permit to fly a drone, especially in a place in the Mara.
I know all about that.
Yeah.
There's been quite a lot of aircraft flying around the last 2 or 3 days,
so
quite low as well.
Yeah, so
with
that's,
the airstrips.
obviously you have to, there's a lot of safety and security and so forth.
Yeah.
But it's great technology and a great way to do research, and cost effective as well.
Yeah.
Over the years, your Mara Naboisho Line project has transformed quite significantly, as has your role, and has become now the Mara Predator Conservation Programme. Can you give us a brief overview of the programme and its goals?
Yeah, so the Mara Predator Conservation Programme was initiated in 2013, and the main reason why it was set up was because no one really knew how many lions and how many cheetahs the Mara had. And if you asked 10 different people, you could get 10 different answers. If you asked guides, you would get one answer. Managers or conservancy managers or whoever, they would come up with their guess estimate. So it was quite strange because the Mara is a really popular place to see lions and cheetahs, and a really important place for lions and cheetahs. So it's really strange that no one knew how many lions and cheetahs there were and how they were doing. So status and health and so on. So we were set up, and that was one of our main, and still is one of our main objectives, is to find out the density of lions and cheetahs and how they're doing over time.
Right.
So we initiated our first survey in 2014, and then ever since we've been doing these annual 3-month surveys, and we're just in the middle of one now. And from these surveys we get updated lion and cheetah densities, and then from that we can calculate numbers. Sure. So, and if you want to look at population trends, you have to have these long-term data sets. So that's really one of our strong sides, is that we have good long-term data sets.
Right.
So besides that, looking at population trends, we're looking at how these predators move in time and space, when and why they leave protected areas and what happens to them, the drivers behind that, and the conflicts that occur when they leave and how we can mitigate and stop these conflicts from happening. And then we have a huge community program as well, and they work to mitigate conflicts, to create awareness, to educate. They do anti-poisoning campaigns, because without the local community, we might as well go home. It's key that they have positive attitudes and can make this thing work.
Sure.
So throughout the various transformations that the programme, other than what was the project, has had since 2013, what do you think the key achievements have been, or the key milestones that you've reached so far?
Well, I think there's quite a few, but from the research side, we've been able to document how, for example, mass tourism has negative effects on cheetahs, more so than lions and hyenas do. Mm-hmm. We've been able to show dispersing male lions, how they disperse, where they go to, and what happens to them, and a lot of them, they do get killed to conflicts. Yeah. Disperse routes and how we can protect these males when they do disperse. Adult females, map out the pride ranges to show how they also, especially the periphery prides, how they use areas beyond the protected areas.
Mm-hmm. Where they could come into conflict.
Exactly. And you mentioned Nashipai before. She actually left the Conservancy, was killed along with the whole pride. Yeah. So be able to show this and how important it is to have these extra or buffer zones beyond the protected areas that are also protected somehow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then from that, we've now gone to what we call real-time conservation, using collars for real-time conservation. So having scouts outside protected areas that we employ that are able to link, where we have the collars linked to their phones so they can see the movement, and when the the scouts can see the lions move out of these protected areas, they can quickly tell the community that lions are there and that they need to keep their eyes open at night, be more vigilant. And if something happens, they can prevent or try to prevent retaliation. So stop the people from killing the lion.
Yeah.
Like Nashipai.
Yeah.
What actually remind us what happened to Nashipai?
So the collar data shows that these lion prides, they spend often less than 5% of their time outside protected areas.
Right.
So it's just once in a while, they go outside.
It's very rare.
Yeah, it's very, very rare. But in one of these rare circumstances, you see left with the pride, and they were hiding in the bushes, and a herder came with cows through the bushes, and then they attacked the cow. To kill the cow, and then the herder went back. He bought some poison. It's actually a legal pesticide.
It's like carbofuran or something.
Yeah,
like
it's
that,
a sulfan. Yeah, carbosulfan. And a small sprinkle of that on a carcass like the dead cow will wipe out the whole pride. So the lions come back often to finish off the carcass.
Yeah.
And then the whole pride was killed.
And then the scavengers and the hyenas, they get affected, vultures, so it goes through the
even,
food chain.
Eagles, even flies that touch the carcass, they die.
Ecosystem.
Yeah. And that's, so just going back to achievement, that's also, I think, one of our big achievements is that we think that the poisoning incidents have decreased after our anti-poisoning campaigns.
Right.
Because we're not seeing these poisoning events that often. We do see vultures come in and die, and they've been poisoned from somewhere far away, but they can get poisoned and fly quite a distance.
Before it affects
Yeah,
them.
and then they often seek protected areas, and then they fall down and die.
Yeah. Right.
But we're not seeing these mass poisoning events where we find dead hyenas and dead lions anymore.
So on a practical level, how do you actually study the predator population here in the Maasai Mara? It's such a big area with so many animals, and so many of them are really, really shy, particularly things like leopards, very good at hiding.
Yeah, so it depends on what we're looking at. So if we were looking at population trends and doing the surveys, then we're out in the vehicle doing observations just like you guys when you're doing your safari game drives. But for us, it's really important that we have the ID of lions and cheetahs. So lion cheetahs, I should say, are our main focus species. And leopards not so much because, as you say, they are elusive, so very difficult to monitor.
So that's just a practical thing. It's almost impossible to actually
It requires more people, and it's you tackle it differently than you would do for lion cheetahs. So for lion cheetahs, you can drive around doing observational data, and as long as we have the ID of the individual, that's how we track them, or the record of how they're doing over time. So we have every single lion in the Mara we have an ID for, and when the cubs are born and they reach a few months, we're able to take ID shots, and we ID them by their whisker spots. So each lion has a unique set of whisker spots, pattern that we have fingerprints. And for cheetah, it's the spot patterns on the sides and the legs. So we have codes for each lion, code for each cheetah, and their ID cards. So when we're out there monitoring, we're able to see how many we kind of recapture over time, and then it's a very complicated model, but it's called a spatially explicit capture recapture model.
Okay.
So it's based on resighting these individuals, and then we take the movement into account.
Right.
And from that we can estimate their densities, and so they're really, really good models. So they take into account for lion cheetahs that we don't see.
Right.
So, for example, in one survey we might see 360 individual unique lions. And then after the model, it spits out 450 lions.
Right.
We have in the Mara. But if you want to look at how these predators move in time and space, then we put GPS collars on.
Yeah.
Because we are not able to follow them at night or when they leave protected areas up in the hills.
Well, you could, but you might end up on their dinner list.
Yeah, or just get lost out there. So these collars, they take hourly fixes no matter where they go. So we can keep an eye on them, 24/7 basically.
Right.
And typically when they leave protected areas, they change behavior completely. They become very elusive and very nocturnal.
Right.
And that's why having a GPS collar on is one of the most important tools we have at our disposal to monitor them. Plus, we can link it to this real-time conservation, as I talked about before. Link it to the scouts out there. We've geo-fenced the protected area boundaries, and when they cross these lines, then people get alerts and they're on it.
I was going to ask that they can actually encourage them back in, or
no, they can't. But they can see where the line is, and then they can work with the local community. So they are more vigilant at night, and they are able to protect their livestock.
Yeah.
So we can try to reduce the number of cows, for example, being killed outside these protected areas, and as well stop the lions from being killed in revenge.
Right. Yeah.
It is a large area, and there are quite a lot of predators to keep track of. And that's why it's important to have a good team, good vehicles, and good equipment.
So in terms of sort of community engagement and education, which we've mentioned now is a key part of the programme, in what other ways does the conservation programme engage with local communities? What else does it do, and what roles do the communities play in the sort of overall conservation efforts? Yeah,
so the community side of the programme, they do a lot of things. So they go out and especially talk to the kids, because it's the younger generation that you really need to talk to and change the attitudes and take them on game drive to see the wildlife, because often they don't see the wildlife. They just know that they can be a threat, and they come and they can kill your livestock and even people. But if they get to see how they behave naturally inside protected areas, then that really changes something for them.
It's difficult to appreciate something that you can't see or don't know exists.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's super important that they get to see that. So there's a lot of education, school visits and so on.
Actually, we've seen those occasionally. A large vehicle full of school kids, and you think, actually, you just assume that they would see the wildlife, but they wouldn't unless they had access to it.
Yeah. So really good example. So before they started taking the kids out, they were asked to draw or make drawings of how they saw lions, and often they would draw a lion running away from a person after killing a cow, and then the person would have a spear in his hand.
Right.
And then they would take in game drives, and then when they come back for game drives, they're asked to draw a lion again. Then you see a lion like peaceful, interacting with other animals, like it's really does something good for them. Cool. And then they do a lot of herders training. So a lot of herders that are coming from the outside now. It's cheaper labor, and they often don't know how to do proper herding. So you sometimes see them sleeping under a tree in daytime, letting the sheep roam free, and it's easy for a cheetah to come in, or hyena and snap a sheep. So just changing herding practices. I talked about the anti-poisoning campaigns, but also just what we call barazas, so community meetings, talking to them about conflict, the importance of wildlife, and how they can avoid conflicts, help build these predator-proof enclosures, so lions can't get cows at night.
Bomas.
Bomas, predator-proof bomas. A whole lot of community engagement, and it's super important to continue and keep on top of it, and then just try to have people have more positive thoughts and change attitudes. And it's really difficult though, because people are mostly keen on keeping these predators alive, but as soon as like a person's own cow is killed, then something happens and he just wants to take revenge. But we're trying to stop that from happening.
Yeah.
I mean, they're worth a lot of money, cows.
Yeah.
I guess you can sort of see it from that point of view.
Yeah, but then if something is worth a lot to you, then you should spend some money trying to protect it.
Exactly.
And that's what we're helping with.
Right. Yeah. You're up.
Oh, it's me, yeah. So we've joined each other many times now over the years out on the savannah to photograph lions. We've also supplied you with photographs. I remember you actually sat pretty much sure I was right in that chair about 2 years ago, talking with one of our guests, looking at some photographs that she had taken. We came across some lionesses I don't think that Moses and Boston and James recognised at the time. You came along, you looked at them and compared them to your sort of ID kits to work out some of the pride movements. How important is photography from a sort of citizen science level to the overall sort of success of the programme?
Well, it can be very important, and it works at times when I am in the field and I meet people, and we talk about lions, and they mention some lions they saw, and then I look at the photo, and then if I can't see them, then I can ID them and see where they come from. So that's super important, but it's really difficult to work with citizen science on a larger scale because it's such a large area, and you have quite a few lions. So keeping track of all the information that comes from tourists and guides and so forth is really time consuming. And to ID the photos and validate. So it's something that we talk about doing better every year, but it's harder than you think.
In practical terms, it's
I mean, if it was smaller when I was by myself in the Bush Conservancy, I could easily go to these few camps on a regular basis and engage. But now we just expanded and we cover 3,000 square kilometers, and there's a lot of, as you know, camps and tourists. But when the interesting thing for us is when there are lines that we don't know, that we suddenly see guests photographing, and then we can try and ID them. And that way it's quite helpful.
Yeah. On a related note, I remember sitting here last year with one of our photography guests, sorry, not last year, but 2 years ago, a guy called Don, and his background is software engineering, IT, blah, blah, similar to mine. And we were talking about AI and whether that could help with things like the whisker patterns. You were talking about the ID kits or whatever. And I think you said at the time it had been outsourced to some university or something to try and see if AI could actually help it speed that whole process up. Did that go anywhere?
Well, there is ID software for cheetahs.
Right.
Because and for penguins, for example.
Right. Not many of those around here.
Yeah, but there are quite a few animals where you can upload the photo and then it can ID an individual. The problem with lions has been getting something that can recognize the whisker spot pattern, because the whisker spot pattern can cheat depending on what angle you look at. So if you look at our ID cards, we have different angles of the whisker spots.
Yeah.
Yes.
But there is a software that is quite good now at looking at or IDing lines from the whisker spots.
Okay.
And there are projects that use it, but we have been using it because, this sounds strange, but the Mara has a lot of lions.
Do you mean in comparison to a lot of other areas?
A lot of lions compared to other places. I mean, I think in Kenya, the Mara has a third of the entire population of lions in Kenya.
Wow.
So there's quite a few lions. And for this software to work, when you photograph a line and you get the ID shot, then you have to, or used to have to crop them yourself and then upload them to the program. And before that, you had to upload each and every individual to the program with cropped images of their size. So it would take,
so long.
Yeah, it wouldn't be cost effective. It would take such a long time to make it work. If you had a smaller population of lions, it'd be much quicker. But now they've perfected it, so they've automated the cropping.
Okay.
And I actually just last week, what I would say, it was Tuesday actually, I had a meeting with one of the people behind this program, and she showed me how it's been automated, so now you can just throw in the picture and then it crops it for you.
Cool.
So we're transitioning now to being able to use the system to help us ID lines.
Such a simple thing to speed things up.
Yeah.
So moving forward, what are the biggest challenges facing predator conservation efforts in the Mara today and in the future?
I think here, as well as anywhere else in the world, is human population growth. And here with it comes a lot of livestock. And so the space for wildlife, and especially the predators, is just becoming less and less. And because of all that, then the conflicts, you see a spike in or increase in conflicts. So I think that's one of the main challenges, but also continue to work with people and having them have these positive attitudes, especially when the conflicts increases. So having this coexistence between the wildlife and the people and their livestock.
Yeah. All right.
So you've spent many, many years now here in the Mara studying lions and now more recently other predators. Can you perhaps share with us what you feel is your number one, if it's possible, most memorable experience or interaction with the local predator population?
Well, I mean, it's impossible to give you one.
Absolutely. I thought that would be
I mean, there's one. There's a lot.
One that stands out the most.
Yeah, well, I mean, there are a few, but I mean, if one specific incident or happening was when, this is a long time ago, when we were putting on these simple VHF collars. They're not satellite, but just VHF. We had antenna, and you would go and find them by this signal increasing or getting louder. And so I had my assistant, my Maasai assistant, and we knew lions were somewhere in this very thick bushes. So we left the car and then we went tracking on foot. just to see roughly which bushes they were in. And he had all these sticks and he had a spear and so forth. And we went in and the signal got louder and louder. And then we approached the bush, and then suddenly we heard that the lions were in the bush, and they kind of warned us, "Don't come any closer," which is fine. Like they didn't come out, but
Right.
So you stop, and then you're supposed to slowly go back. But we stopped, and then I looked over my shoulder, and my assistant had thrown all his sticks and spears up in the air and was running towards the car, and he was supposed to be the brave one. And I was standing there with the equipment, and not panicking, and then slowly walking back. Luckily, the lions didn't come out. The last thing you do is run.
Exactly. Yeah. As Moses said the other day, the only thing that runs is food.
Yeah,
so what was the feedback to your assistant after that?
Well, he was. I didn't have to say anything. He was very embarrassed.
Right.
So if you talk to him today, he will always remember that incident, and he's very embarrassed about it.
Fair enough.
Yes, you're not going to forget that in a hurry.
No, but otherwise, it's just being able to follow these predators from cubs to they get older, and then for males they leave the pride, or if the male finds takes over a different pride, and small cubs becoming mothers and of their own. Just being able to follow this whole path, from small cubs, and you do get attached to some of them, and
Sure. Imagine.
That's why it's very difficult when something happens to them, or if they get killed by people. But that's very special, and that's one of the nice things of having these long-term projects, or being in the field for so long, is to be able to witness this, and also see how lions, for example, the females can take large cubs away from intruding males, and then go somewhere, like hide them for a long time.
Yeah.
You don't see them for a while, and you think something's happened to them, and then suddenly you see them return to the pride.
Yeah.
That's quite beautiful.
So every year we come here and we meet up with you. Alan and I give a donation per guest that we bring. Is there a way that anybody who's listening or watching the podcast could also donate?
Yeah, so we are completely reliant on funding and donations, and it's one of our biggest struggles, and like a biggest, or what do you call it? The weakest link is getting enough funding, enough money. So people go to visit our website, marapredatorconservation.org.
Yeah.
There's a link to how you can donate and help the program.
We'll put that in the notes.
We will.
Yeah. So Niels, thank you very much for once again coming to see us here at Matikogo. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
And thanks for the sort of interaction with our guests who are sitting out of shot and who are going to probably grill you with 1,000 questions as soon as we turn the microphones off. It's great to see you again. Thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. It's always good to see you guys when you're out in the Mara.
Great.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Cool. Cheers.
Thanks, Niels.
Thanks.
We're on safari at the minute in Kenya, it's Maasai Mara, and we've just done something we'd never done before. We just come back from another game drive, but earlier on in the day, we went to the local market and bought a goat.
What you got there, Alex?
As you do. This goat is going to be something special for an anniversary for two of our guests that are here with us on Photo Safari. We're not going to give them the actual goat, obviously, even though we've called him Graham. Graham the goat.
This is Graham. Guys, meet Graham.
Oh, he has a name now.
Hello, Graham.
The reason we're not going to give the goat to them directly is because he's being cooked as I'm recording this, and it's a surprise, and we're going to have Graham the goat for tea. So here's the grill, and here is Graham. Well, about half of Graham, and there's the other half of Graham.
The reason why I've done this is because in Maasai culture, when there's a celebration to be had, the tradition is that they go to the market, they get a goat.
Really?
Or something like that. And this is what happens when there's a
Oh, wow.
Well, happy wedding anniversary to
Thank you so much.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah.
Yes, we're on it. Thank you. Yeah.
Happy anniversary, Mikael. May you have many, many more. Smile as you cut the cake. Count a smile as you cut the cake. It's very yummy, yummy. It's very yummy, yummy, yummy. It is very yummy, yummy, yummy. It is very yummy, yummy, yummy. It is very yummy. It is very yummy. It is
Jambo. Jambo na matata. Jambo sana. Asali gani. Musuli sana.
Just such nice people and Maasai people doing that for us. Oh, that's special. That's special.
Happy anniversary.
Aisha Marefu.
Yeah, Maisha Mrefu.
Long life, right.
Well, that concludes part 2 of our safari special. We have no idea what we're going to be doing in episode 12 yet because we're still here, but it'll be along in a while.
Yeah, so if you'd like to come with us in 2025 to...
Just ignore that.
If you'd like to come with us in 2025 to photograph the amazing wildlife in Kenya's Maasai Mara, we're taking bookings now. The website is africanphotographysafaris.com, or you can message us on social media or email us on info@africanphotographysafaris.com.
We do not have anything else to say other than you work harder and drink lager. Cheers, cheers. Work harder, drink lager. Work harder,
drink lager.
Work harder, drink lager.
We can do that. So that's it for the safari special, both parts 1 and part 2. If you missed part 1 and you've just got here on part 2, just rewind to the previous episode and you'll find that. All that remains for me to say is ta-ta.
And I'll just say work harder, drink lager. Cheers, goodbye.
I'll do that.
Cheers. That's going down here.